I'm Derrick Day, and he is.
And I am Aaron Tomlinson. Great to be with you.
It's good to be here. Good to see you, man. Th- you know, I'm really excited about tonight because we're kind of going off the beaten path,
Yeah.
and I love going off the beaten path.
Yep.
And so, um, we were talking about like what are we going to talk about this weekend. So I thought let's talk about conspiracy theories, and I even put a little ticker at the bottom of the screen.
All right. I love it. We're up in our game. Right
Yeah,
on.
we're getting fancy, man. We're getting fancy. So,
Be sure this.
yeah. And I actually can't share because I'm using my phone as my camera. Um, Let me see. I can still do it from my computer. Well, it's actually everywhere I need it to be. So I'm good for now. I'll share it out afterward. But so anyway, man, how are you doing? That's the important question. That's the $1 million question.
I'm glad it's Friday. I'm doing good. I'm doing well, but I'm glad it's Friday. I'm glad to be here Phreology Friday with one of my best friends in the world and some great people to share it with us. So it doesn't get any
Yep.
better.
Cool, man. And I feel the same way. It's been a long week. It's been a challenging week, but I think that on a lot of levels it was a good week. So,
Good.
um, the topic for tonight.
Hmm.
Did we already talk about what's in the glass?
No,
Uh,
we didn't.
okay. Well, what's in the glass.
For me, it's just a simple port reserve or
Okay.
reserve port. Maybe, I don't know which comes first.
Yeah, I still haven't done the port of call yet, but that's on my list. That's on my to do list.
I
Matter of
thought
fact,
about that for tonight, but I thought I'd go a little easier on the brain cells and the liver tonight.
yeah, well, no, I went hard, man. I've got a old fashioned right in my big ass Derrick cup.
Should
I
be a good
mean,
night.
and it's like it's chock full of goodness. It's chock full of bourbony goodness.
On.
so so this week is I picked the subject, so I'm going to go ahead and lead in.
Okay.
But I want to talk about conspiracy theories, and there are some really good ones out here. There's some shit out here where eh, you know just all kinds of stuff. The moon landing, UFOs, Area 51, all these different things, right? But one of the things that I want to get into, I mean, the conspiracy theories, that's the fun part, right?
Right.
But the serious side, and actually this might be kind of fun too because we have like a clinical psychologist as part of our team. We could talk about some clinical psychological shit
Hmm.
and have an expert opinion. It's like having a doctor in the family, right? So one of the things that I want to talk about is conspiracy theories are sticky. If you've ever read The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about why things tip, right?
Right.
Why something goes from a just a flash in the pan to being a true phenomenon, right?
Right.
So, what makes a conspiracy theory sticky? So, before we actually get into some conspiracy theories, I want to hit you with the sticky part as I
Sure.
kick it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So I researched this a while back because there's some wild. I mean, the ones you're mentioning are some of the tamer ones in my mind. Some of the by tamer, I just mean it's less out there, less more believable, I guess, than some of the stuff that's out there that people talk about. Um, so there's several reasons people like conspiracy theories. One of the biggest reasons, though, is there's something about human beings, and you see this in social circles with peer groups. You see this in with your kids that are going to school. Maybe you remember when you were in school. There's something about there's something in us innately that we like to be in the know about things
Mhm.
that other people aren't in the know about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
You see this with social things like if somebody's popular, if it's the boss or something. I know something that's going on in the office that you don't know. It gives us this feeling of sort of superiority or whatever it is that it does for us, social status, whatever. So it appeals to that, right? It appeals to this idea that I'm smarter than everybody else. I've figured it out. Everybody else is sheep, but I'm one of the enlightened, one of the awakened ones, one of the ones that's in the know. I know something you don't know. It really appeals to that thing innate in our nature. And one of the things that cracks me up is like, one of the reasons I don't buy into a lot of conspiracy theories, Derrick, is because if it's all over YouTube, like how is it that you got these, like you know what it's like to work with a group of people, you know what it's like as a pastor, as a supervisor, to try to get everybody on the same page and get everybody to get along and get everybody to move in the same direction. And for some of these conspiracy theories to work, you have to have massive amounts of people buying into this and keeping it a secret. You know how hard it is to keep secrets, right? I mean, the U.S. government has to threaten you with the death penalty if you break your top secret clearance or whatever, right? So that's the first thing, is like, it's really hard to pull this off. So if you're smart enough to pull this off, like if you're smart enough to orchestrate a fake moon landing, or you're smart enough to orchestrate an inside job on 9/11, and yet John's uncle's friend that he knows, who's making YouTube videos in his garage, is in the know and putting this stuff out, like, that's not a very good conspiracy, man. You know what I mean? I mean, there's still things that, I mean, I know, and I hope if I go somewhere I'm not supposed to, just put me in check right away. But I know that you have a military background, so I can assume that you have some security clearance that I've never have had. And that you know things about the government or government operations that I don't know. And yet those things are still kept secret. We're best friends and you don't tell me that stuff.
Right.
And so, and nobody knows that stuff. It's not common knowledge. So how did Weird Uncle Fred, get it off the internet?
He did the research.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons I find them hard to buy into. But back to the psychological reasons, that it appeals to people's I'm in the know, you're not in the know kind of thing. The other thing it does is, and this is a tough one. I don't mean to insult anybody. I'm just telling you what the research says. But a lot of people that buy into conspiracy theories have a lack of significance in their life. They're not producing anything. They're frustrated. They're bored. Life is mundane. We don't like the mundane. We'd much rather have the exciting. And so if I'm in the know and I'm disseminating this information, then all of a sudden I have a part to play. I have a part in this grand scheme, where I'm a truth warrior or a keyboard warrior or whatever the case may be. And so it gives my life a sense of significance. It helps me deal with the boredom and the mundane of life. So those are two things that it appeals to. And then the third thing that I'll bring up, and there's others, but I'll kick it back to you after this one. But the third thing that I would bring up is that life can be scary because it can be so random and chaotic.
Yeah.
I was talking to a guy a while back, and he was talking about, and he's an atheist, and he was talking about how humanity has no oversight, how we're just basically flying through space on this global spaceship with nobody driving it. And we're just this evolved species, and nobody's putting us in check, and nobody's stepping in and saying, hey, you're screwing things up. And so life is very random. Life is very chaotic. There's no control, right? I mean, if you think about it, you're flying, how fast does the Earth go around the sun? I don't know how many thousands of miles per hour or whatever.
I know that we turn at about 25,000 miles an hour. We rotate.
Yeah. So I mean, you got this spinning spaceship going around the sun with asteroids and all other, and nobody's driving it. Nobody's in control of it, right? And so that randomness is very frightening. So we have an evolutionary thing in our brain that says we need to have answers for things. We need to understand why things happen. If we understand why things happen, we have some control. So, for example, when the coronavirus hit, it's much easier to deal with psychologically this idea that somebody's in control of that. Somebody's orchestrating that. Somebody cooked it up in a laboratory and leaked it for some nefarious purpose. That's actually more comforting to believe than maybe life's just random, and Mother Nature could throw shit at us that we can't deal with, and could potentially, damage us or wipe us out as a species. And I can't deal with that much chaos existing in my worldview. And so it's much easier to cope psychologically with the idea that somebody's orchestrating these things than it is to cope with the idea that the world is a really dangerous and random place. So those are a few things. With that, I'll kick it back to you.
Well, here's my theory. and this is, I believe that, like Voltaire had it right. He said that those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And I believe that part of the reason why you hit on something, the human need to know, right? Nobody likes to be uninformed. They like to have some clue as to what's going on. And so I really believe that religion helps to propagate and perpetuate conspiracy thinking. Because if you can believe that there is a magical sky wizard, and he gave birth to a zombie son, and he's got a ubiquitous spirit that basically fills the earth, and if you can make this elaborate game of telephone last as long as it did, and have the majority of the world believing it, it's really easy to get a conspiracy theory, because basically there's a conditioning that has to happen in order to get people to believe something. Like, for example, in the military, boot camp is a conditioning vehicle. It prepares your mind and your body for something that you're going to encounter in your day-to-day life in this situation. So there has to be some conditioning. Basically, your brain, this ball of fat sitting in your head, has got to be seasoned and tenderized in order for it to be properly cooked, to be prepared. And that's what I think is behind a lot of this. Because if you look at popular, and we're going to go through some conspiracy theories tonight, but if you go through some of the popular ones, if you go through like election fraud, vaccine theories, global warming or climate change, and if you go through some of these more popular ones, right, you're going to find that the majority of the people who buy into these have already bought into something religious. They're already there. They, I got to say this too, like, the whole electric car thing. I'm finding so many metaphors for life in this, right? But like, there's this thing when you set up the battery to charge at home, and the best way to do it is not to just plug in the car and start charging. The best way to do it is to schedule it, right? Because if you schedule it, what happens is the climate control of the car will precondition the battery, get it to the optimum temperature for charging, right? So in other words, so it can receive the energy that it needs, it's preconditioned. And that's for any good conspiracy theory to work, you have to be preconditioned. There has to be something else that's overarching, that's guiding, that's leading, that's preparing you to take this false information, because most conspiracy theories are false. Now, there are some where it's possible that they be true. Right? Because every good lie has a grain of truth, and if you don't believe that, go back and look at the teachings or the methods of Joseph Goebbels, who was Hitler's. Damn, I just said Hitler.
Oh shit!
It's not in the chat anywhere, but anyway. He was the Third Reich's Minister of Information, and
Mhm.
and he is the guy that created the big lie theory. That if you tell the biggest lie, tell it often, tell it vociferously, that eventually people will believe and accept it as the truth, right? So I think this is where a lot of conspiracy theories come from. That's my take.
Oh
So
yeah,
back to you, man.
absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with that. Um, and not to mention, I mean, in principle, everything you're saying is true. In context, evangelical Christianity, man. I mean,
Yeah.
especially dispensationalism, this idea that everything's being orchestrated towards a one world ruler called the Antichrist, right?
Yep.
And all this Bible prophecy crap. And so people buy into that, and then they buy into the conspiracy theories. And I remember at the beginning of 2019, when QAnon was starting to gain some traction, I had some
Mhm.
friends that were trying to get me to follow Q and all this stuff and what I think about it and stuff like that. And I started listening to the theories behind what was going to happen. And this is fair to call this a theory because they were making projections into the future and they were all wrong. So clearly they wasn't facts
Right.
or they would have been right. So, but you know, this theory that of this takeover, that's the first thing, like this takeover. And they were telling me these theories that they thought were brand new. And I remember, Derrick, I remember as a young kid, because I was when I was, you know, in grade school, that's when Hal Lindsey came out with his book, The Late Great Planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I remember it was kind of going around our community and stuff. And they were saying things like this one world government, one of the things they want to do, one of the things they have to do to make Bible prophecy come to pass is they have to take away your money.
Yeah.
So right after, Richard Nixon had moved America away from the gold standard for their currency,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then there was this big scare, that the government was going to take away your money
Mm-hmm.
and it was going to go to completely electronically or whatever, and you'd have to have
Crypto.
you'd have to have a chip in your hand or on your forehead, or so if you didn't buy into the, as you call it, the Bible, if you didn't buy into that first, that created the foundation
Mm-hmm.
for these conspiracy theories because we had to make current events try to fit that particular thing, right? So how many
Right.
things were leading to the mark of the beast? The UPC codes, remember that when they first
Mm-hmm.
came out with the
Yeah.
UPC codes that you scan, that was leading to the mark of the beast. And then the internet was the beast that was going to
Yep.
lead to the mark of the beast. And so even though these people weren't Christians, they were New Agers that were buying into this QAnon stuff. It was the same thing. So totally valid point, but I think evangelical Christianity magnifies that reality by their Bible prophecy predictions and stuff like that. And then the second thing that I would say is that religion always has to have an other.
Yeah.
We have this dualistic idea of good and evil. Everybody's, God's 100% good, the devil's 100% evil. There's no gray area. There's just this binary good, evil, light, darkness reality, which is much easier for the brain to cope with than the complexities and the nuances of life, right? So again, in the chaos, we're simplifying it down to this binary thing. There's two forces, one's for good, one for evil. You got to pick sides. And so it's easy to other someone else. It's what makes conspiracy theories dangerous. And it would be interesting to talk about how Goebbels and the Third Reich used conspiracy theories to gain power. So there are two components where the religious mind buys into this: the Bible the what you said, believing in something that you can't verify is true objectively already sets the stage. Then you've got evangelical Christianity's Bible prophecy bullshit. And which reminds me, I saw that there's going to be a blood moon on election day, and because there's going to be a lunar eclipse, and it made me think. Who's that guy? Hagee and his blood moon 8 years ago. So anyway, kind of all over the board with that, but I think those are some of the main things. Like you set the foundation for believing in stuff you can't verify, 100% buying into it. Secondly, the Bible prophecy stuff, we got to make it fit, and this fits with the Bible prophecy stuff, so therefore it must be true. But then I think the biggest one and the most dangerous one is that we other people. And what's really dangerous about these QAnon theories and othering, in longer history to this, but one of the culminations of the Holocaust was this belief that Jewish people were Neanderthal. They were somehow subhuman. Right. And so we've taken UFO theories, and now we've inserted that people that we don't agree with are subhuman because they have lizard alien DNA. They're not really humans. And when you dehumanize people, so again, back to what you said, if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities. So if I can get you to believe that your local Democratic leader is killing babies and has lizard alien DNA, now he's not human. It makes it much easier to kill him.
Exactly. Yep. And I want to take a minute, just real quick, to debunk the whole QAnon thing, right? In a few easy steps, right?
Right.
Because the way this whole QAnon thing came about is that somebody who was leaking this information had what's called a Q security clearance.
Okay.
And so the rumor was that this Q security clearance is the highest security clearance. Well, first of all, let me explain what a Q security clearance is. And you can go look this up. Don't take my word for it. But it is a security clearance that is granted by the Department of Energy.
Right.
Let me say that again. The Department of Energy, not the Department of Defense, not the State Department, not the Secret Service, not the Department of Justice,
right?
But the Department of Energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a security clearance that people have to have in order to inspect nuclear power plants and have access to control rooms and the nuclear core. End of story. End of story. There are security clearances that are far greater,
sure,
and far more significant than a Q clearance.
Right.
But somebody put out, well, the Q clearance is the highest clearance out there. And this is what they did to make this all fit. Because again, juxtaposing or converging religion and conspiracy, there is a codex that's a mystery or mystery codex of the Bible that's called the Q.
Interesting.
And I know that in your theological learning that you heard about the Q. Nobody knows where the Q is, but they said that, like, for example, the Gospel of Mark originated from the Q, right? And that all of the other Gospels are copies or offshoots of the Gospel of Mark. Now, to put all of this together, the religious people said, see, this Q clearance ties in with the Q codex, and this is how we're decoding what God is trying to tell us today. And this is how it gained traction. The whole QAnon thing got its wheels literally.
And I didn't know that.
Evangelical church. So the moral of the story is that, let me just say this, right? There's what you call and I could say this publicly. There is what they call a top secret SBI special background investigation compartmentalized. In other words, when you have access to compartmentalized data, that means that you have top secret clearance for that particular thing that's compartmentalized. It's not a blanket clearance, but it's a very high clearance. And there are clearances higher than that. Mm-hmm. But that's the whole thing. So I say that to say that basically QAnon is bullshit. And anybody that listen, I'm going to say something. This is going to be crude. Trigger warning, right? Anybody that believes in the whole QAnon thing is a goddamn fool. Period. Yeah. Bullshit. But let me say this, so let's go to some of the What do you want to go with? Historical conspiracy theories, or do you want to go with contemporary conspiracy theories first?
I'll let you pick because you kind of have the agenda there in front of you. So
Okay.
I'll just roll with it.
I don't actually have an agenda, but one of the things that I'm really big on is this:
Yeah.
UFOs. Whoops, I started it up and then closed it by mistake because I
I
want
love
to
it.
let it run for a minute so that you can see the flying saucer in the light. Um, I really believe that there is the possibility of life beyond Earth.
Hmm.
I just cannot believe that in the vastness of the universe, and we're talking about trillions of stars that we can quantify.
Sure.
Well, not man, trillions of stars, but billions of galaxies, billions of galaxies, and galaxies are systems of solar systems. And each galaxy there are like billions of stars. Um, that the possibility of something similar to us, more advanced than us, less advanced than us, that it has to exist. Also, I also believe in the multiverse theory
Yeah.
that there are multiple universes out here, and I think that they're kind of like when you make soap bubbles and you blow soap bubbles, and all of these bubbles float in the air, and every now and then you get a couple of them that converge and they form a bubble. And sometimes it's permanent, sometimes it's temporary, but I think that in some cases what we consider to be extraterrestrial life may be extra dimensional life,
Hmm.
because there are certain things like the Navy now has released some footage of what they call, they've identified as UFOs. And basically you had top US fighter planes, the best with the best
Right.
pilots tracking
Right.
things, and they make maneuvers that defy the laws of physics as we understand it. I don't know if you remember this or not, Aaron, but there was this show out in the 80s, mid 80s, that was called Automan, and the star of the show was Desi Arnaz Jr.,
I don't know
right?
if
And he was this computer scientist that basically created this synthetic person, right? Automan, and he had this car that looked like a Lamborghini Countach made of light, and so the guy, Desi Arnaz's character, could ride in this car with Automan, but Automan would take these 90-degree turns at high speed, and Desi Arnaz would be plastered up against the window. And it was like it was a gimmick of the show, right?
right.
So the point is that when some of these ships or things that were not identified or not quantified, that when they take off and change direction and at a super rate of speed,
Right.
that it's something that would destroy a human anatomy if we were to endure that. So I believe that there is the possibility of life beyond Earth, possibly extra dimensional life, and I also believe that because of the law of conservation, which says that energy is neither created nor destroyed, that it could possibly be that when we leave this realm, that we graduate to something, really crazy, like extraterrestrial or extra dimensional. I mean, who
Mhm.
knows? And I'm
Right.
hypothesizing, but I'm not hypothesizing in vain, because there are hypotheses
Right.
that support what I think. So
Right.
anyway, that's the first one. So over to you, man.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything you said makes sense. And I thought the UFO disclosure, whatever it was, it happened last summer, whenever that was, where
Yeah.
they showed the little tic tac that's doing all those maneuvers and stuff that you're
Yep.
talking about, little tic tac
Yep.
shaped thing.
Yep.
Um,
That's the
and
one.
so, yeah, I mean, I don't find it hard to believe at all, just because I've never experienced it. I don't find it hard to believe at all that we might be being visited by alien life, or there could be alien involvement. It's when we start piecing together all the other little stuff that we get into trouble because it's all subjective. It's all so I mean, like, here's the thing. So like I got friends that are really into the what I would call UFO spirituality.
Okay.
And what UFO spirituality is that there are alien races more advanced than ours, more spiritually advanced than ours, who are channeling telepathically to people messages to help us ascend and grow as human beings. I mean, this whole UFO thing has taken on a completely spiritual component and dynamic to it. And so, okay, that's fine. And maybe that's happening, maybe that's not happening. I have no idea. But these same people will be critical of Christians because they don't have evidence for their claims,
Right.
don't have solid evidence for their claims. You're taking, at the end of the day, you're taking somebody else's word for it. You know, I saw you had some debate on your page about the historicity of Jesus, right? At the end of the day, if we believe Jesus was a historical person, we're taking someone else's word for it. And in this case, we're taking someone else's word for it that lived thousands of years ago, right?
Yeah.
But unless I've experienced it, unless I've been abducted by aliens, and there are people that claim that they have been, and I'm not here to dispute their claims. But unless that's happened to me, unless I've had, you know, that kind of alien contact, I don't have firsthand experience with that. And I think that's one of the things that troubles me the most about conspiracy theories is that people repeat them like they are fact. It's like gossip gone completely out of control, you know? I mean, maybe some Hollywood elite is in some satanic cult or part of some sex trafficking ring or something. I mean, yeah, that's a possibility. We know that Satanism exists. We know that criminal Satanism exists. We know that not drug trafficking, but sex trafficking exists.
Human trafficking, yeah.
But we don't know. I don't know who's running that shit, you know? And so if I were to just take somebody's word from it off of YouTube or my friend's word for it because they heard it off of YouTube, and then I say, okay, I take my prominent person that I want to put, like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is, you know, everybody was really big in the QAnon world for a while as being one of these sex traffickers or human traffickers. Well, I don't know. I don't know that. So if I go out and repeat that, it's the same thing as repeating gossip. It's just doing it on a global scale.
Yeah.
And if they're not, I want you to think about this. If you've ever been hurt by someone gossiping about you, imagine someone gossiping about you on a global scale and telling lies and how painful and damaging that might be. But that, for some reason, never enters their radar. They're just so sure of themselves with something that they cannot verify, something they cannot fact check, something they cannot objectively prove, and they're just taking someone else's word for it.
Yep. And the funny thing is that, you know, we talk about proof, right? And I'm really big on proof, like empirical evidence, right? But I give a wide berth to what can be modeled mathematically.
Right.
You know, in other words, that we don't know this for absolute certain. Like, for example, we speculate about the temperature of the sun, right? And we've constructed mathematical models that basically track with not just our sun, but other like bodies. And so because this math is repeatable, these models are repeatable, that they have some credibility. And that's my thing, right? Not everything has to have physical proof, but you at least have to have a good hypothesis, right? If you don't at least have a good hypothesis, then you can't really assign any credibility to it. So the thing about UFOs are one is that we understand enough about space travel. We understand enough about certain power plants, like for example, we're able to mathematically model warp drive. Now, warp drive has not been physically created yet, but the math holds up. You know, now a lot of our science, like in terms of metallurgy and propellants and things like that, we haven't got there yet. But the overarching principle behind it is something that can be modeled and repeated.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, when you start talking about the ability to traverse vast distances quickly as an alien ship would have to be, because like, for example, our closest neighbor in the galaxy is Proxima Centauri, and Proxima Centauri I think is like 100,000 light years away.
Wow.
It's an insane number, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would take thousands of years to
Mm-hmm.
get there, right? Even traveling at the speed of light. So I remember one of my favorite shows as a kid was Lost in Space, and they
Mm-hmm.
were on their way to, they called it Alpha Centauri, but that's what they used to call Proxima Centauri. And I thought about their travel, and I used to really be obsessed with the Jupiter too, man. I used to build models. I built my own models
Oh, wow.
of the ship. I was so nerded out on that. But when I think about it now, I said, shit, the technology that even that they were talking about wasn't enough, even. And so when you get to like Star Trek and you talk about warp drive, and I remember when I was a kid, I thought the warp drive was factors of the speed of light, that each warp factor was, some gradients of the speed of light. Well, it's not. What this goes back to Einstein's theory of special relativity and the curvature of space-time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to create a core that can create a warp in space-time, basically it's like taking a piece of paper, like you are here and your destination is here. Now this would take a long time to get there, but if you were able to curve space-time,
Yeah.
right? Now this shortens the distance. And that's what the warp drive is all about, right? So anyway, I say all this to say that we understand how all of this works in a very rudimentary sense. So
Mm-hmm.
when we see a ship that, or a phenomenon, let's not call it a ship because we don't know for sure,
Right.
but we
Right.
see a phenomenon that shows up at an extraordinary rate of speed, or that it accelerates away at an extraordinary rate of speed. We can say, okay, this tracks with what we know about warp drive,
Right.
even though we don't know entirely what it is. So anyway, I say all that to say that, and also then when you're talking about curving space time like that, you're not just curving space, you're curving time. So now you're introducing the possibility of time travel. I was listening to one, like I listen to these the Great Courses
Mm-hmm.
audiobook.
Yeah.
And there was one guy was talking about a where you and your twin sister are on Earth, and your twin sister goes off and travels 100 million light years away and comes back, and you're dead, from old age, and she's still 25,
Yeah.
right? And so how can I say this? I don't believe the UFOs are a total conspiracy. I believe
Right.
that there's some truth to this, and
Right.
and I also believe, like, Area 51, Groom Lake in Nevada. This place is guarded by Wackenhut, and if you look up Wackenhut, they're kind of like Halliburton or companies like that, but they're a private security company, and they have orders to shoot to kill. They drive around in unmarked vehicles, and they patrol a perimeter like 20 to 30 miles outside of the Groom Lake facility, right? And you can't get anywhere close to this. Matter of fact, this is a true story. One time I was on a plane, and I was flying from Chicago to Los Angeles, and we flew over, and the captain came on the intercom, and he says, now if you look to the port side of the plane, that's the left side of the plane, maybe about 20 miles off, you'll see the Groom Lake facility known as Area 51. Aaron, there were two black F-16s, totally painted, totally black. As soon as he said that, these guys showed up and started rocking their wings. And when a fighter plane shows up beside you and starts rocking its wings, it's telling you you need to divert your course, buddy, because otherwise we'll shoot you down. True story.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's something there. There's something there that the government is willing to protect with life threatening force. And you know, like you say, okay, like we know that certain things like the F-117 and the B-2 bomber, that there was a certain part of their development that happened at Groom Lake, because we know about the Lockheed Skunk Works. That's all common knowledge. But what else is going on there? You know, and you have people like Bob Lazar, who claims that he worked there for years, and he talks about the whole facility and all of that. And you know, people have debunked what a lot of what Bob Lazar has said, but there's a lot of what he says that makes sense, and there's a lot of what he's shown that makes sense. So I don't dismiss the UFO theory completely out of hand. That's my
no, I'm same. I'm the same way. It would not surprise me if an airplane crashed in wherever, New Mexico or whatever, and got shipped to what was it, Roswell? If you know, it wouldn't surprise me. And I do think it's interesting that this UFO phenomenon seemed to show up about the time we developed the atomic bomb.
Yeah, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's key to this, right? Because if you there's a movie, a Star Trek movie called First Contact, right? And it's sort of like a convergence between Star Trek, The Next Generation, and the old Star Trek. But anyway, the guy who developed warp drive, basically this at a certain point in time in history, this guy was supposed to launch into space and engage the warp drive. And when he engaged the warp drive, he got the attention of the Vulcans, the Spock's race of people, and they came together and began to talk, and they built the United Federation of Planets and blah blah blah. That's the storyline. I'm getting really exposing my real
weakness here. I love it.
But the whole atomic thing is that, let's say that there's a signature that an atomic weapon gives, that you know, that some otherworldly body, that they see this and they say, okay, they've graduated to a new level of sophistication. Now we need to start watching them, because that's the ability to destroy on a mass scale.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's when you start. So this comes back to, I was thinking about this too, psychological reasons why people buy into stuff, but this comes back to Occam's razor, right? So for people that don't know what Occam's razor is, it's something that, you know, scientists try to use to guide their thinking, that when you're creating a hypothesis or trying to explain a phenomenon that you observed, that usually the simplest explanation is the best.
Yep.
Now, that's not just pulled out of the air, like, oh, well, yeah, let's just keep it simple. You know, we're not making any room for complexities. It's because the simplest explanation sticks to the facts the most. When I get beyond the simplest explanation, then I'm introducing all of these other factors that have to be controlled in a scientific experiment that are purely subjective, 100% subjective. So you could have elements of truth that, you know, perhaps the atomic bomb showed up on somebody's radar, like the Vulcans, and they're keeping an eye on us, and they showed up. Maybe we did shoot down, or they had a crash or something, and we found some aliens or something like that. So just because there's alien life, and just because there might be alien life visiting the the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. I'm typical American. I think we're it. Yeah. Visiting the planet Earth does not mean that they have infiltrated all of our structures and they're messing with people's DNA, and that they want to control us and turn us all into slaves. So you start adding all that stuff in, and you're violating Occam's razor, and you're bound to be wrong. You're just bound to be wrong. And so I find a lot of the conspiracy stuff may have a grain of truth, an element of truth to it. And obviously conspiracies happen. I mean, obviously they do, you know, at high levels, or you wouldn't have top secret clearances and things like that. But when you come up with these sort of weird X-Files. Like I just wonder if this isn't the generation that grew up watching X-Files.
Yeah.
And we just thought, you know what, X-Files is so much more interesting than reality. Let's just introduce some X-Files stuff into of course they would say, well, no, X-Files was Hollywood trying to tell us the truth of what's really going on.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I think that the X-Files, feeds off a lot of ancient mythology. Like a lot of Sumerian, the Anunnaki, and all of that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of Egyptian mythology, a lot of Greek mythology, and so basically it's these mythologies that have been rewritten or repackaged for a newer generation. And so if you again, and this is the big lie aspect of it, that if you make it convincing enough, that people will say, oh, well, that's what it is. Like the Matrix. The Matrix is a really good example of that, right? It said,
Yep.
okay, we're living in a simulation. We're all just batteries in this simulation, and we're having these out of body experiences that we think is life. Well, okay, fine. The Matrix made it made an interesting hypothesis for
Right.
this, but there's no how can I say this? You cannot mathematically model that repeatedly, and it's not like people haven't tried. There basically anytime some kind of sci-fi situation comes up, people the mathematicians, the physicists, they sit down and say, okay, what is the likelihood of this? What is the
Mhm.
possibility of this? And they'll either come up and say, oh, well, that's possible, or no, that's really just complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And so but anyway, man, let's go to another one.
Yeah.
What
How about the JFK conspiracy? Because that's kind of
oh,
the godfather in
the
my mind.
the
That's the godfather.
JFK theory. So
Yeah.
let's
Hear your
bring up
thoughts on that one.
our JFK
Hmm.
movie reel. Okay, so I have some thoughts on this. One is that um, I don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. In fact, there's really enough evidence to say that he wasn't really involved at all.
Right.
Um, that he may have been a patsy. Um, Now, one of the theories is that that JFK, he's JFK is sort of like the father of the Navy SEALs.
Right.
That and what he wanted paramilitary organizations to do the things that the CIA was doing. He had a lot of contempt for the CIA. So
Yes.
there's a conspiracy theory that the government, the CIA, was responsible for JFK's death. And I
Yeah.
think that one is pretty far-fetched. Grain of truth, but the point is that I think that there are other presidents that have been more dangerous than JFK, Nixon, for example. So if you're making a case for the CIA doing something like that, that would be a better example. Then there's also the whole Cuban angle, right? That Castro had people involved in this because he was upset about the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? And there's some there's some credibility to that. And this is a funny thing, right? This came out in the 2016 election, right? That Donald Trump had actually alluded to the fact that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the JFK assassination. And again, Ted Cruz is a cat that really amazes me because this guy's a complete cuck. Because anytime, you know, it, here's my thing: you can say what you want about me.
Right.
It's like somebody on my public group took a stab at me about my weight, right?
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, that's fine. but it's like if somebody talks about my wife or my kids or something like that, you keep my family out of your mouth, because now we're at war. Because if you talk about me, I don't care. I'm going to sleep like a baby knowing that you think I'm overweight. That's fine. But if you start messing with my family, well, okay, if you say something, I don't know what else you'll do. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna act accordingly. So anyway, I say all this to say that the Cuban angle is one angle. And then there's another one, right? And this is the mob angle,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That Bobby Kennedy went after organized crime with the blessing of his brother when he
Right.
was Attorney General, and John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy both had romantic um, engagements with Marilyn Monroe,
Yes.
who had been the wife of Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe DiMaggio, while he was a squeaky clean guy, is said to have had extensive mafia ties. And, it could be that the convergence of those things, produced the assassination of JFK, and then later in '68 the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, because the whole thing about Sirhan, that's another one like Oswald doesn't really hold water. So I believe that there is more to it than the Warren Commission revealed. There's that there's more to it, and I think that Oliver Stone with his movie gave a lot of creative license to this, and helped to foster more conspiracy theory. I think that there's more to that than we know, but I don't think that I think that the whole idea of saying that our government was behind that, I think, is a stretch.
Yeah, I like the mob theory myself. But like, here's the difference. Like, I can take that one seriously. In fact, I've watched a lot of documentaries, and you got to take documentaries with a grain of salt, because they're out to tell a story. They're out to shape a narrative. They're not just reporting facts. But it's just been fascinated with that since I saw the movie JFK.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. I mean, I know, like, there's people that have supposedly recreated computer models of, the shooting. And I think Mythbusters did a thing, with the rifle that supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald
There's
used.
no way that he could have fired 3 shots in the time that was alive.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, you got witnesses that say they heard gunfire from other places and stuff like that. And I watched this Zapruder film over and over and over and over. And every single time, I don't care, and I don't understand propulsion. I can be totally wrong. I mean, I get that. I'm not going to be a fool here and sit here and say I know, and I know. But his head looks like it's getting hit like this. It doesn't look like it's just springing back from whiplash or whatever. To me, you run it in slow motion, it just looks like he's taking a hit from the front. So I don't know.
And that's the key, because like allegedly Oswald, from where he was in the book depository building, and my brother-in-law works in the book depository building, by the way.
Interesting.
So I've actually been in there and been able to to see, because they have like a space where allegedly this happened.
Right.
But the first shot happened from behind, and if Oswald fired it, that was the first shot. That was the shot that went through the neck.
Right.
And came out through the throat.
Right.
That was the exit wound. But the second shot, it had to come from the front, because it had an exit wound from the back. And there was a piece of Kennedy's head that went on the trunk of the car that Jackie Kennedy jumped up to try to retrieve. So there were at least 2 shots that hit Kennedy, and then there was a third that hit John Connally, who was the governor of Texas at the time. And it's funny that when Connally died, they said that this bullet was in a place that if they operated on it, it was like in his inner thigh, that it was close to his femoral artery, and it could possibly kill him. So when he died, there were people like, okay, he's dead now. Let's go in and get the bullet, right? And his wife was like, no, I don't want his body violated, and this, that, and the other. And they said that they buried John Connolly in Texas, and they poured concrete over his vault to make sure that no conspiracy theorists would go in after the bullet.
So interesting.
So anyway, so there is something, there's something there. It's like one of those things where there's smoke, there's fire. We just don't know. We don't know what it is, and I don't think that the Warren Commission was that they operated in a full disclosure mode. I think that there were people, for whatever reason, that they decided to keep the true findings of that report secret.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing about this that makes sense is the cover up, and here's what I mean by that.
Yeah,
because I think Marilyn Monroe was part of this. I just do. I think JFK's assassination, Bobby Kennedy's assassination, and Marilyn Monroe dying is all connected somehow.
Yep.
But the fact that Jack Ruby just walks up to Oswald for no apparent reason and shoots him before he could really say anything or go to trial or anything like that, and supposedly there were ties between Jack Ruby at some point in the mob.
Yep.
I mean, it just, there's a little bit more to this than just my uncle's brother's friend.
Well, you know what? Not only that, I think that you can unpack that further, because it's like John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, but Martin Luther King Jr. I think that his assassination tied into that, because James Earl Ray, he said in an interview before he died, he didn't do it. He was a patsy, and where they found him, or where they said the shot came from, that ballistically it wasn't possible.
Mm-hmm.
Where James Earl Ray was. So there's something there, and somehow these men were all connected. Fun fact about Dr. King's death is that at the time Dr. King died, Bobby Kennedy was campaigning for president. He was running for president that same year. And so when Dr. King was killed in Memphis, Bobby Kennedy used his campaign plane, to fly Dr. King's body back to Atlanta.
Interesting.
Right. So there was something. These three were all
interesting.
Were all related.
Now, see, I always thought the government was responsible for MLK's death. I always kind of thought that. So,
well, it's like you could make that case, because J. Edgar Hoover had kind of a hard on for Dr. King, and he tried to create make him into a boogeyman of sorts. But I think that Hoover, for all of his power, real or perceived, I don't think that Hoover, and I think that just orchestrating a murder of that order of magnitude, I think that was above even Hoover, and that statement is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but
yeah,
I don't think that Hoover was behind that. I don't think the government was behind that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, but the another fun thing is that the King family sued the federal government, right, and won in a civil suit. So basically, the government claimed some culpability in civil court, or accepted it, and they paid a settlement to the King family. What that means, I don't know.
Interesting.
So next theory, and I know we're going into overtime here, but we'll do at least one more. What do you contemporary or past?
I picked the last one, so I'll leave this.
Oh no, you said you picked the last one, so
I picked the JFK one. So you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Well, I'm gonna pick on one that let me see. Actually, I thought I had this one, and I don't. Well, maybe I do. Here we go. Let's see if this is. Yeah, there it is.
Oh my gosh.
The
Oh my,
moon landing. Yeah, we'll end up we'll wind up on the moon. We've gone. uh, you know what? I remember in July of 1969 um, watching the launch to the moon. It's like every kid I knew at that time was glued to their TV sets and watching this. And then when they broadcast um, the Eagle One lunar module landing on the moon, and and Neil Armstrong taking his famous first step,
yep.
I remember being glued to the TV and all of that, and and I've heard all of these conspiracy theories, but I don't buy any of them. You know, let me say this, right? That an interesting thing about about our space program and everything. Let me just say this: basically, everything goes back to Hitler.
Oh my God.
Because uh, uh, Hitler had this passion toward the end of the Second World War for what he called wonder weapons, and among them was the V-2 rocket, a liquid fueled rocket that the Germans were using to terrorize the British, and their theory was that if they could break the British resolve, they really underestimated the Americans, and they thought that the Americans were nothing without the British, and if we could just break the back of the British, we'll have this whole Europe thing, solved.
Sure.
And so you have these rockets that were liquid fueled, gyroscope guided, and they were, these things back, and this is 1944, 1945. These rockets are flying 3,000 miles an hour.
Wow.
There is no defense against these things. Now,
Sure.
here's the funny thing is that they didn't have it perfect. So a lot of these rockets blew up mid-flight. Some of them missed their targets, but some of them they landed and they were horrible.
Mhm.
But the guy behind all of this was a young German officer named Werner von Braun.
Okay.
And Werner von Braun was after World War II was brought to the United States along with a couple of hundred other German scientists
Mhm.
under a thing called Operation Paperclip, where they put all of these guys down in Huntsville, Alabama, to develop the U.S. space program. Let me say this, and here's the thing: the United States and the Russians basically divided up the German brain trust, and neither one of them had a space program without the Nazis. Now, that's the funny part, right? That all of this, the Russian space program and the space race and the American space program and the space race, the race to the moon, all of this stuff had its origins in Nazi fucking Germany, right?
Wow. Excuse me. Wow, that's crazy.
So watch this, right? Werner von Braun was considered to be an American hero. After Alan Shepard went into space, and then later John Glenn went up and orbited the Earth, now we're in the same space as the Russians. And
Yeah.
Werner von Braun is given carte blanche. He's given a license to do whatever he wants. And here's the thing: the Saturn V rocket at the time was the single most audacious technical project ever undertaken by any country in the world. There was more technological power that went into the Saturn V than in the entire nuclear bomb program led by Robert Oppenheimer in World War II. So there was a brain trust that was behind this. There was shit tons of money behind
Right.
this. And on top of that, there was a lot of national pride and hubris behind this, right? Let me explain. This is why the moon landing has to be real, because the Russians actually made it to the moon first, except their first landing on the moon was unmanned. It was a probe, right? But it successfully landed on the moon. And so the Russians are like, hey, look at us. You know, Soviet engineering triumphs over everything, right? But then we respond by first sending astronauts around the moon, and then in the second attempt, actually landing them on the moon. What happened to the Russians after that? The Russians threw their hands up. They said that this is bigger than us. We can't compete. Now, nobody gives up on a hoax. That's the whole point. It's like if Russia gave up because the Americans said, "Oh, we went to the moon." Do you know that the Russians verified everything that we did, every nuclear test that we did, every nuclear submarine that we launched, every nuclear aircraft carrier, every nuclear power plant that we built? The Russians tracked that. So when we went to the moon, for them to say, fuck this, you guys, you won. For them to admit defeat like that, they would only admit that defeat if it had actually happened.
Sure.
So that's why it's like all this stuff they talk about the shadows and all of this stuff, and there are explanations for all of that. There Mythbusters, they did something on it, and there have been a bunch of other people that have taken this on, and they say, okay, there are reasons why the flag flops. It's not, there is no atmosphere on the moon, but there is seismic activity, and that when you put the flag in the ground, it's wobbling, and it's going to wobble because it doesn't have anything to steady it, right? So you have all of this, and you have artifacts. They brought back rocks from the moon. They took pictures of the Earth from the moon. You can't simulate that. It's just not. It's not possible. And my favorite one was Buzz Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin is one of my heroes, right? Because somebody stepped up to Buzz Aldrin in an autograph signing line and asked him, why did he fake the moon landing? And you know what Buzz Aldrin did with his 75-year-old self? He punched that guy in the fucking mouth. Like, you just don't fuck with people named Buzz, man. I mean, that was his nickname, but if they call you Buzz, that's somebody you don't fuck around with. Yeah.
It took a minute, but I remember that. Yeah.
So I don't think that it was faked. That's so. Over to you, man.
Well, I never gave that one the time of day. I got to be honest. So I haven't given that one a fair hearing. And the Bible says that a fool answers a matter before he hears it.
Yeah.
Which I think is good advice, by the way, but or a good statement. But yeah, I just never gave that one the time of day. Actually, you helped me understand something, because I'm like, why would they do, like, my thing is why? Like when they were talking about the nanobots, you remember the injection supposed to put nanobots inside your body, and we talked about that a few times on here. And I kept asking my QAnon friends, to what end?
Yeah.
So they can track you.
Yeah.
You got a cell phone. So they can, I mean, the craziest one I heard was so they can make us do perverted things to each other.
Yeah. So, I mean, and you had talked about that too. And this was a real key, like the whole nanobot thing. There are drugs that we know that can't pass the blood-brain barrier. Drugs.
I know. But so my thing is always why, what's the motivation behind it? And I just could never understand why would we fake a trip to the moon? Like, why? So you kind of answered that question for me, actually, that, it made the Russians give up. So maybe we faked it to try to, fool the Russians or whatever. Okay. At least now I have something to go on there. But I got to be honest, that's one I just totally never gave any credibility, not even enough credibility to really even look at it. I mean, to me, that's kind of like flat earthers. Like, what's the point? I
Right.
mean, why are you out there arguing and fighting for a flat earth? It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And
Yep.
so the moon landing one is just one I never, ever gave the time of day. So I don't have a lot to say about that one.
It doesn't make sense. But here's the other thing too, is that now the United States and the Soviet Union, the former Russia, the former Soviet Union, are not the only moon member or the only members of the Moon Club, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
now China has landed probes on the moon, and so has India, right?
Right.
And so the probe that India had sent before it landed, it passed right over a landing site, one of the Apollo landing sites, and it took pictures and it showed the lunar rover, the base of the lunar module, and a bunch of artifacts that were left behind.
Interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
So it's like, okay, so how did all that stuff get there?
Yeah.
And what incentive what would incentivize India to try to say, oh well, here's all the American stuff.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
So
all
anyway,
right.
man, you got time for questions, or are you ready to bail?
We can do some comments. We got started late, so I'm gonna have to bail. I can't stay on too much longer, but we can look at some of the comments.
Yep. Well, let's go through the comments. But you know what? Here's let me do this because you're more on a timer than I am. You pick out the comments. I usually do that, but
all right, sure. So Amy Gilman says nanobots are a marvelous invention that will allow for non-invasive diagnostics for medical concerns and maybe even non-invasive medical procedures in the future. It's a beautiful thing. We all have phones and computers. If someone wants to track us, they will. If anyone tracks me, I can assure you they'll be very bored. Amy, thank you for saying that, because I've said that too. Like, who gives a rat's ass? Like, my life, let them track me. I mean, they ain't gonna find anything. Exactly. They're gonna die of boredom.
Yeah.
Like why would they want to? Let's see. I saw this one earlier. Brett Erickson says history documented or eyewitnesses or not television? Question mark. I'm not sure. Do you know what that comment? What he's trying to say there?
No.
What you're trying to say there, Brett?
Yeah. If you can clear that up, Brett, that would be great.
Let's see. There's one here that I saw that Tender Anahart had. Yeah, she said my parents were working at Jack Ruby's club in Dallas. It was a hit done by the Irish mafia. Well, something just made it jump, so I lost. Yeah, it was a hit done by the Irish mob, and Ruby was used as a patsy, but I don't talk about it. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's Joseph Kennedy made his money during Prohibition as a bootlegger. That's where the Kennedys got their money, right? And there is said to have been a lot of animosity between Joe Kennedy and the Irish mob, and that Joe Kennedy turned to the Italian mob for help and protection, but then John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy basically gave the mafia their ass to kiss, and there you go. Bob's your uncle.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't. Now, to me, that's Occam's razor for me. That makes the most. Seems like the simplest explanation. I mean, so you could look at that one just to come back. You could look at that one. The Lee Harvey Oswald lone gunman shooter solution kind of violates Occam's razor because it doesn't seem like the simplest answer. It seems like there's you got to put a lot of monkeys in there to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, if you had a semi-automatic weapon, right, possibly you could get those shots off. But in order to get those shots in that kind of grouping from that kind of distance, even with a semi-automatic, the recoil is going to mess with the shot, right? So it's like a bolt action is going to give you better accuracy, but to be able to chamber round 3 times with a bolt action rifle in the time in the 3 times that Kennedy or 3 shots that were fired, that doesn't hold water.
Yeah. And again, why does Jack Ruby just walk up and shoot him? And well, I mean,
Yeah, which Jack Ruby did kill Oswald. That part we know. We know that's what happened. But
yeah.
why?
Why? I don't think it's because he loved Kennedy so much. I don't think that was it. But let's see. Ben Urban says exclusive religion rises and falls on paranoia, superstition, and hysteria. Organized deception horribly skews our perception. Boy, I like that. Organized deception horribly skews our perception. That's poetic there, Ben. Somebody's talking to you here. Bentley Pike, he says, handsome looking both, buddy. LOL.
He's talking about both of us, man. But
oh,
but you're obviously the
talking about him and you.
You're clearly the looker here, man. You're the thirst trap of the bunch, man, without a doubt.
That's a scary thought. Let's see. I'm sure there's some I missed here.
Did you see Mary Ann? She said, "I'm told that Marilyn is still alive. That her death was fake."
No, I didn't see that. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it is.
She's hanging out with Elvis and JFK Jr.
That's another one. It's funny that they never released like the cockpit voice recorder of JFK Jr.'s crash, and they said that basically where he was flying, he's supposed to be flying on instruments, but he was flying visually, and he lost the horizon. That's the theory. Yeah. But there's another theory that that JFK Jr. and his wife had a big dust up argument in the plane, and that caused him to lose focus. And I think that's probably closer to the truth.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. All right, man. I'm gonna have to bail. I'm sorry, I was late, everybody. It's my responsibility that we were late today. But
no, it's all right, man. You have business to take care of, and that's what we take care of business, take care of family first. So
yeah. But alas, I'm gonna have to bail out. I'm gonna have to find the escape hatch in the spaceship.
Yeah.
This was fun. I like this. I'd like to hear people's feedback if they enjoy these kind of episodes.
Yeah. So if you guys have any other conspiracy theories that you want us to take on, leave it in the comments, and we'll definitely take it under consideration. If it's something that we can make it work, we will definitely give it the college try.
Absolutely.
So
all right,
close us out, man.
With that, brother, love you. Love everybody that's watching. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for participating. Thank you for joining us on Fridays. And with that, our benediction, peace and hair grease. Good night, everybody.
All right. See y'all later.